What's going on, everybody? So it's been another disappointing week, another tiring, long, frustrating, disappointing week. It's been since May that we started messing around with the Corvette, and the original plan with the car was just to throw it together quick because it should have been simple. We weren't going to change a bunch of things, just put another good running motor in it and go racing and have some fun at Onondega's Pour Your Own Puddle. But it's spiraled out of control, you could say. We have been through 4 blocks in since the end of May, and every single one of them nearly had a different failure mode for a different reason, and we have not had a string of bad luck or things overlooked or things rushed to the point of missing details. And it's been a truly rough learning curve, especially since last year we had 2 stock bottom end 6.2 motors that made over 1,000 horsepower at the crank. One was 920 at the tire, the other one was 1,006 at the tire, and would have made more had it had a bigger turbo. To go from that to, in a matter of 6 weeks, 8 weeks, mowing through all of your good spare blocks and parts, among other things, but just that's really, really frustrating. But the car keeps giving us these little glimmers of hope, these little things that like keep you going, keep you wanting to keep trying and pushing, and it's showed enough promise just to keep you wanting it, you know, to keep pushing through the headaches and the nights without sleep and the money burned. And anyway, I'm out here today taking apart the engine that just went in the car. This is the 5.3 that we put together when we converted the whole car over to turbo in basically a week and a half. We took the old nitrous motor that was hurt out of the car, put together this new 5.3, the best one we've put together too. Everything I went through doing things I typically wouldn't do, especially if you're doing stock bottom end, you do the general, you know, put good valve springs in it, make sure the lifters are good, make sure the push rods aren't bent, put good head gaskets on it, stud it, put a good cam in it, get rid of the DOD if it has it, choose your oil pan and go to town, right? So this engine we actually kind of built. We bought good rods and pistons for it. We had a good crank, a good forged factory crank lying around for it that needed some modification to make it work, but I was game and it was a really cool experience. And I went through the trouble of measuring all the bearing clearances, measuring the main bearing clearances, measuring the thrust. I weighed every rod, every piston, every wrist pin, and tried matching them up accordingly. Used a good torque wrench, a good accurate torque wrench for torquing the cylinder heads. Clean the block, clean. We don't have a hot tank or anything, but I take them to the car wash, clean them out, bring them back, air them out, clean them out with rifle brushes at that point. And when my dad came back, because I had him, he was nice enough to go wash it because I was doing something else. He came back and I wiped the cylinder and it still had a little bit of machining oil on it because we had to hone these cylinders oversized, not with a ball hone. We took it to our buddy and actually had it honed rigid with a rigid hone and fixture, so that way they would be straight and concentric. And So I sent him back to the car wash to wash it again until a good test is you have a nice clean white cotton rag. I use t-shirts, brand new t-shirts that I cut up. And if you can wipe the cylinders and wipe inside the block and don't get any gray grit or machining oil or anything off of it, if it's just rust from it flashing real quick, then that's fine. But if you get gray, you're not done. So anyway, the point is we took a lot of time and care in putting this engine together and put it back in the car. So we did the engine. I redid the whole fuel system and PTFE lines and stepped up the size. I had to drop the tank and put another Walbro 450 in the tank. I integrated the engine harness and ECU harness from my car into this car. Did a quickie job on the cold side piping, did a quickie job on the hot side, but it actually turned out nice. And my buddy at Qualified Engineering whipped us up a really nice T4 flange, 3-inch into T4 for the turbo, and changed the rear gear from 456s to 323s in a matter of basically a week and a half to 2 weeks. We ended up having all sorts of problems the day of, from stuck injectors, which my buddy hooked me up with a set of injectors at the last minute off of his car so that we could run, to a cross pin retaining bolt broke off in the cross pin, and that was a pain in the butt to get out, and then had to get a new cross pin and a new bolt at last minute on Friday, and the race was Saturday, to the point where we're throwing the rear end in the car at 1 a.m, building the rear end in my driveway in the dark and throwing it in at 1 a.m, and then drove the car 40 miles to my buddy's dyno, down dirt roads and everything, street car, and dynoed it. And here's what I was talking about how it gives you these moments, these glimmers of like success, is you get it on the dyno. I put in the tune from my car last year and made some adjustments, and so it was rough, it was garbage. And the thing made 670 horsepower at 14 pounds of boost with 18% converter slip. Like holy shit. It wasn't done. Like, that was just our first, just throwing a tune in it and getting on the dyno and a couple little adjustments, put some fuel back in it so it wasn't leaning. Wow. It's like, this thing could really fly if we get some time with it. So I was all pumped because I know that 670 horsepower to the tire in a 2,800 pound car still gets down, especially for, the local no prep and street stuff. And I was happy to know that I can come back here with a better converter and make some more steam and really see if this thing could be as fast as my car was last year, maybe even faster, with a smaller motor and a smaller turbo and like leftover junk parts. So that was really promising, and I felt really good leaving the dyno that morning. That we left at like 4 a.m. Oh, that was the other thing, is the crank sensor took a shit on the dyno on the last pull on the coast down, just died. No crank signal, so I had to run to my buddies 10 miles away and grab a crank 58X OEM crank sensor and come back to the dyno and throw it on so I could drive home. It's just par for the course with how this car has been. So we drive home, everything seemed pretty decent. I get back here at 6 a.m. and I start wiring the trans brake and the two-step circuit in. Got that all done. We packed up our boxes and went to the racetrack, and we get there, and we didn't know how hard we could leave because it's still got a stock 10 bolt, and when we ran it as a nitrous car, the nitrous, you preload the driveline, so there is no slop when you launch. It's already loaded. It's not like you're slamming it like a clutch. And since we're using the trans brake because it's a turbo motor, we had to do that. And I was guessing, 100% guessing on the launch RPM. I had a slow boost ramp in it and didn't, because I didn't want to just break the axles off right there on the line or shatter the ring and pinion. I don't know. I've broken 10 bolts several different ways. So we race. I'm going on 40 hours no sleep. I was lazy on the tree because of that. was racing a nitrous car that had won 2 out of the last 4 no preps at Lapeer, and he got out on us by about a car. And with the slow boost ramp, with the low launch RPM, with a 1.7 60 foot, which this car is 60 footed, high 1.3s, low 1.4s before off a foot 1800 RPM foot brake launch. We still caught him and we're at his rear tires with the nose of the car by the 8th mile. Like, we probably had 5 to 7 mile an hour on him. 5 to 7 mile an hour on him. I mean, the car was coming on up top. The car mile per hour the same on that first round. It mile per hour the same that my Camaro did the year before, and the Camaro was in the 5s. The first time out the year before, because the Camaro picked up 10 mile an hour from the first time out to the last time I ran it. I improved the mile per hour over the summer, 10 mile an hour. So the Vette, the first time it went out with less motor, less turbo, soft launch, all that, whatever, that doesn't really affect mile an hour, but it went the same mile an hour that my Camaro did. So it was really promising. I could really feel it pulling up top. I just wanted to keep going and keep going and keep going. And that's what I'm talking about, is these promising little victories, these little successes. It sucked to lose first round, but I was taking a total guess at how much the rear end could take. We went out and made one practice hit after that, and I upped the launch RPM, I think 400 or 500 RPM, and increased shortened the boost ramp by half a second, so it was still even kind of slow. And the car picked up 2/10 on the 60 foot and picked up 2/10 at the 330. And I actually, my ET was better at the 8th, but I let off because the car was kind of getting out of shape. So the mile per hour was down 4 or 5 mile an hour, but it still went faster overall. So it was on track to be a couple tenths, 2 to 3 tenths faster at the 8th than it was first round. So the car definitely had a lot more in it, even past that, because the launch was still soft. Fast forward to issues. I'm having a RF frequency issue or a charging issue where at high RPM I'm losing the data log. The ECU doesn't cut out, the car doesn't run funny, but I'm losing data logs at past like 5,500, 6,000 RPM. So that was one of the things where we got invited to a cash days. I didn't want to race it because I didn't know what the car was doing. I didn't want to make any more test passes because I didn't know what the car was doing. And I was so happy with what we kind of had that I just wanted to go home and get some freaking sleep because I'd been awake for 40 hours straight. So sort of, take your little victories, right? Get home, drive the car to work the next day, 40 miles to work. And by the time I got to work, as I drove, the oil pressure just dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped until when I was pulling into the parking lot at work, and only had 5 pounds of oil pressure while it was running. Yeah, freaking sucks. I was pissed. 100% defeated, 100% pissed. Like, pissed off myself for driving the car, which it would have done it anyway, but still just really freaking sucks. The car hadn't even been together for 3 days, right? And I'm thinking, why? Like, why? I know what oil rings to run on the pickup tubes. I know what pans to run with what. I know, like, all these basic little LS idiosyncrasies and bullshit. I know all that crap. And it was like, checked every, the bearing clearances were all set. Everything just didn't make sense. Trailer car home, get the engine out, and this is where we're at now. What I ended up finding out is that the number 3 main, where the thrust bearing resides, was wiped out on the backside. So that would be this side here. The crank was shoving forward and wiped the thrust out. Now, why did it do that? That's what I've been all week scratching my head about, is why did it do that? And there's some main things that you can get thrust failure from is improper assembly. Well, I know the proper torque procedure for torquing the mains and setting the thrust. And I've put these motors together before, taken them apart, stock shit, put it back together, didn't set the thrust, and it was fine. Beat the piss out of it, was fine. I've never had a thrust failure in one of these motors, and I've ran 10 of them now. Built and stock bottom end. Never had a problem. torqued properly or not torqued properly. Never had a problem. The thrust on this thing was within spec. It was right in the middle of GM's tolerance. It was like 1 to 9 or something, and it was at 35 or 35 10,000, so 3.5 thou. So that was within spec, like right in the middle. And so improper assembly, improper clearances, excessive loading, which is force on the back of the crankshaft being shoved forward, excessive loading or contamination from debris or whatever. So I'm ruling out contamination because I know how well this block was clean, and it was fairly clean to begin with, but there was a lot of care taken there. Improper assembly, I'm gonna say no, that wasn't the case either. So my theory is improper loading, and a couple different things are overloading of the crank, and a couple things I think played into that. And it is the adapters that you have to run on these converters, because it had good pull out. We've ran this transit converter with other motors and it didn't wipe out the thrust. Is that little adapter there that you have to run when you run an old school turbo 400, 700 power guide, whatever, with a LS. And so meant for a small block is you have to run this adapter so that way the torque converter can pilot into the back of the crank properly. We're running the correct flex plate. That wasn't the problem. Is I wonder if that adapter, because we've reran it, wasn't greased enough and galled into the back of the crank here possibly. And if it galled and hung up, then you are pushing on the crank sooner and it's not sliding in the back properly, which can load the thrust bearing. All right, gearheads, I know it's been a while since I've updated, but I've been really busy trying to get this thing together. So the last time you saw anything, we converted the car from nitrous to turbo and ran it, and then promptly hurt the motor shortly thereafter. That, as I said in the other videos, ended up being the thrust bearing got wiped out for various reasons. So things we've done to remedy that this time around is we opened up the clearance, probably double what it was. It was like 3.5 before, now it's 7.5. Still within spec, but on the wider side. Modified the thrust bearing before installing it, so that way we send pressurized oil to the thrust face instead of it just sort of being like a drip oiling or splash oiling the thrust face. Different converter, because the converter might have ballooned, so different converter with anti-ballooning plates. It was actually in my car the first time I turboed it. A different crank adapter. And a different cooler. We had just a normal like tube cooler, went to a barn plate, thinking that the other one might have been restrictive, causing high line pressure. I am installing a Low Dollar Motorsports 0 to 300 PSI pressure transducer, so that way I can monitor trans pressure and make sure that that's not a problem. But yeah, all of that, and I'm hoping that that takes care of our thrust bearing issue, which we've never had before. Other than that, the engine, same rods and pistons as the last one, a new stock crank, or new used stock crank. This rotating assembly has been balanced this time. Everything was cleaned exceptionally well. The deck and the head surfaces were checked for flatness. They were good. I would have had a machine if they weren't. We had the block punched oversized for the pistons. Mazes did that work for us and had a pretty quick turnaround. Always appreciate that. And then, the big thing that I think, the two big hitters that I think is gonna make this car a lot quicker, make a lot more power than the last motor, is these are the 799 heads, a lot higher flow numbers, and than the 862s I had on there, and you don't really lose that much compression. And then the other thing is this converter should not slip nearly as much up top. It should not give up like the other converter did. So it should make a significant power improvement. Other than that, we're just cleaning up some little things. I'm actually mounting the intercooler this time. I cleaned up the wiring quite a bit. I still need to finish it. I put mechanical gauges back in it because I didn't really like the tablet. So gotta finish the wiring, finish wiring those couple sensors I added, finish wiring the gauges, and we should be all set there. The last thing we have to do is Kevin at Qualified Engineering helped me narrow the Mopar 8 3/4 axle. So we gotta knock this rear end out, weld the new, let's see if I got them around here. Weld the, ain't gonna dig them out. Got a bunch of crap sitting there. I have the new spring perches, not spring perches, but yeah, spring perches for the new axle that I have to see where these spring perches sit, what angle they sit at in relation to the pinion, because I like where the pinion angle is at on this car, and I really don't want to have to shim those perches in order to get the angle back to where it was. So I'm gonna weld those on, and then can stuff that rear end in the car, and then I gotta cut down my old prop shaft out of my Camaro, weld it back up, and put it in the car, and then hopefully don't have to clearance the tunnel at all, because Mopar 8 3/4 have a bit more pinion offset to the passenger side than a factory GM rear end does. And when we narrowed it, I tried to accommodate for that, but in order to make the tubes equal length, or I could not get it all the way out. I would have had to shorten up the other side of the axle, or the other side of the tube, and I just couldn't get rid of all of the pinion offset. I got rid of some, but not all, so still has an inch. Anyway, that's where we're at. 1 week till roadkill nights. Later. All right, guys, so this is what I was talking about, how the bad luck with this car seems to never end. We got the motor done, started the car the next morning with the break-in oil and filter. I took it up and down the road and made sure everything was fine. And then I had to go to a friend's son's birthday party for a couple hours, and then I was going to come back and cut the filter open and change the oil and put in the new oil with the filter, and actually start testing the car a little bit in preparation for the dyno time we had scheduled on the following Tuesday. But when I got back, this is pretty much what I came home to. Definitely one of the harder moments that I've had to deal with. Seeing that happen to the car is pretty nerve-wracking. It just really is hard, because this car has been like 3 straight months of time and money and frustration, but we didn't give up. We kept pushing, and just when everything seemed to be going good, I drove this car, like I said, before this happened, and everything was really good. The car felt really strong, the motor felt smooth, and I was really excited to get it on the dyno and see how much of an improvement our changes made, and was really getting excited for some testing to get ready for roadkill nights. And then this happened. The takeaway from this is, thankfully, nobody got hurt. But the main takeaway is that I typically drive this car. I typically drive most of our cars, and I have the most seat time with cars with this kind of power. And you need to be smart when you're driving cars like this. I mean, granted, testing on the street racing, all that crap isn't really the smartest thing, but you still got to try and be aware of your surroundings, aware of what the car is capable of, know what the car is going to do ahead of time, so that way when it acts funny, you can compensate for it. And that's not what happened here. The person driving the car didn't have a lot of seat time in the car, and wasn't ready for when all the boost ramped in. And then to top it off, the tires were cold, and probably at about 25 pounds of pressure and on a bumpy road. And that car is a very light car. The steering's fast, and it's very easy to overdrive it. So that is how things like this happen. So takeaways is, you have to be up on cam. You have to be ready for anything when you're messing around with these kind of vehicles. So it's pretty much the end of the car. It was not salvageable. There wasn't any body panels on it aside from the door that was salvageable. Frames toast. The only good things left on it are basically the engine and the transmission and the turbo, and the electrical stuff. So at this point, that's where I stopped, and I haven't even taken the car apart yet. It's still sitting in my garage. I just stopped and focused on helping my buddy Carl and my buddy Matt. Shout out to Roadkill crew for allowing me to have my buddy Matt take my spot at the last second. I know they weren't really allowing that many new people in this year, so that was cool of them to, not let that go to waste. So I helped them, and we had a pretty good time at Roadkill, and you guys will see that in the next video. So maybe one of these days we'll get another vet, and kind of continue with what we started here, because there was a lot of really good things. Would have really liked to have known what the car was really capable of, because I don't really think that we even scratched the surface with it. I think it would have been a very consistently mid-5 to low-5 second capable 8th mile small tire car. So, to be continued. Thanks for watching, guys. Later.